everyone, and warm greetings from Dubai to all of you joining us today. Have you ever felt that writing your research paper was way more difficult from conducting the research itself? For many of us, I would say that that's the reality because writing is somewhat where our ideas must have to be shaped, clarified, and communicated within the institutional context. I'm Maryam Sayab, Director of Communication at Asian Council of Science Editors, and our today's webinar and session is dedicated to exploring these very challenges and strategies related to research write-up in institutional context. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Lisa DeTora, Associate Professor and Director of STEM Writing at Hofstra University, New York, and guest faculty in Medical Humanities at Zucker School of Medicine. Dr. DeTora, one of my lovely colleagues, she has distinguished career in biomedical communication, regulatory documentation, and scholarly publishing. Apart from that, she also served as lead author for Good Publication Practices 2022 update and one of the board members of Asian Council of Science Editors. We are honored to have her with us today to speak on and deliver a wonderful presentation related to from research to manuscript, the role of scientific writing in institutional context. Liza, over to you.
Thank you. Let me share my slides. Okay, let me just so can everyone see the slides? Okay, I hope so.
Yes.
So thank you, because I can only see my screen now. So thank you everyone for having me. I'm very honored to be here. I'm very honored to be part of the Asian Council of Science Editors. And I do have one little announcement, which is I did get promoted to professor since the meeting that we had in 2024, which is very exciting as well. So let me just see if this will advance. So Maryam and I put together a list of topics that we thought would be helpful for this particular group. And, feel free to put information into the chat and we'll get to that as we can. So we have the role of scientific writing in institutional contexts. What are the key qualities of effective writing? What are some ethical considerations and some collaboration strategies? And then some common challenges and tips for improvement. So this is just a brief introduction of the kinds of writing that I do. As Maryam kindly said, I have had a distinguished career in regulatory writing and in biomedical publications, but my PhD is in English, and I trained in something called narrative medicine, which is done at Columbia College of Physicians and Surgeons at Columbia University. And so I write in various contexts. So in English, in literary studies, in medical humanities, in comic book studies. My last paper that came out was actually about comic books. So it gives a broader perspective with how scientific writing fits in to big institutions like universities. So if I think about the role of scientific writing in institutional contexts, I think about the way that the writing is interacting with different kinds of institutions. So academia interacts with the public and publishers and government and professional societies and industry. So all of these settings do interact with each other, and we need to think about many audiences for a lot of the work we do, especially the scientific work that's being done by members of this particular group. So what do we do that has to do with writing? Well, we're designing and presenting research data. So for instance, we need to design the study. So that often requires writing to get the study design together or a protocol. We need to meet the regulatory requirements for whatever type of research we're doing. And we're using writing to share insights and information with members of our discourse community. So people who publish in the same journals that we do, or other members of our institutions, or other members of our professional fields. And we also use this to build our credibility as researchers and scholars and to reinforce our professional values and ethics. So writing does a lot of work, which is why it's very, very difficult. So what do we use scientific writing for, or when do we use scientific writing? So I put together this little figure in order to show that writing is taking places at all times in the research process, and it just keeps kind of flowing through. And this is another reason that it presents challenges, because as a researcher, you're being called on to constantly adjust what you're writing, who it's for, and then what the standard is for that throughout every single activity you do. So research design, data collection, reporting, and publications. You may have to write a report and a publication for the same study, or maybe you have to write different publications for different data sets. As you're teaching, you need to be able to impart this information to your students or to your more junior collaborators. So how do they report information clearly? How do they interpret data? How can they do an effective literature review? So how can they read the literature and then comment back on that? And then for communication, just kind of generally. So if we think about the role of social media and other kinds of communication. So there are data sharing requirements for some kinds of studies in some regions and countries. We also just do routine science and health communication. Maybe your university has a website where they advertise or say what the various faculty have published recently. There's technical communication. You might be asked to write an expert review of some sort or an editorial, or to participate in a guideline like good publication practice. And when Maryam showed the video before, Laura Dormer and Dick Rantorser and I all worked on the good publication practice guideline, and that was a different kind of writing for us. So, what are some of the key qualities of effective writing? In scientific writing, for me, the most important key quality of effective writing is that the science itself is good. So that you have scientific rigor and that the science itself was high quality. So you need to present that accurately. You need to have a high quality research design, high quality analytical methods, and any other methods that you have, laboratory methods, data collection, if it's a clinical study, that those methods are high quality and consistent. Then in terms of the writing, you need to follow what we call in English or writing studies, genre conventions. So what are the rules for the kind of document you're writing? What are the rules that that journal has? What is the style for that journal? So the text needs to be well presented for that journal, for that audience, for that purpose. So if it's a report, a publication, a guideline, or a literature review, you need to follow recognized rules. The organization needs to be logical, and the presentation will then meet the audience needs. So if you're reading a literature review in a specific journal, so there's a series of expert review journals, they all have the same format and they have a very similar tone and language. So the reader of that journal always knows what to expect. And then clarity. The information is clear to the reader. So the tables, the figures, the text they're complete, they're well organized, and the language is clear and easily readable. So there's a basic principle here for effective writing, which is that the reader should understand the work on the first attempt. So this is a basic plain language principle that if the person is a member of the intended audience for the work, so for a manuscript, for an abstract, for a poster, for a presentation, the reader should understand that the first time they try. I mean, as long as there's not a big language barrier. So I'll just move on quickly now to ethical considerations. So if we think about research ethics, that's the main consideration. So just as the best writing has the best science, the best ethics are also the best ethics of that science. So the research has to follow established ethical principles. So I used clinical principles here, so Declaration of Helsinki, but I'm also mentioning good laboratory practice, good clinical practice, or good manufacturing practice. But there are other ethical principles. So if you're doing environmental research, if you're doing community-based research, there are ethical principles for those as well. You also need to follow kind of writing and academic ethics. So you're being honest in the writing, it's transparent, and you're giving the right credit to the contributions. So we know where the information came from, and that you're including all your eligible authors. And then for publication ethics, you're following the ethical guidance from that journal. You're avoiding bad practices like plagiarism or ghost or guest authorship as defined by that journal. And you're disclosing your competing interest and your funding sources, and you're disclosing the use of AI as consistent with that journal guidance. And just the image here is actually the initial signing of the Declaration of Helsinki. I thought that would be interesting to include. So here's the general take home for ethics. So ethical writing is based on ethical research that's honestly presented with full credit for all the work performed and disclosure of the funding and other competing interests. Okay, so moving on now to collaboration strategies. So one of the things that we do for collaboration or effective collaboration is to identify the authors and collaborators early in the research process. So you want to use tools like the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors or the Council of Science Editors have included in their guidelines, or there's something called the credit taxonomy, which was put together through the Council of Science Editors, and it lists out all the different tasks for scientific studies to make sure that you're crediting everyone and including enough people on your kind of your team. You will then build expectations based on the deliverables. So you're writing a report, are you writing a manuscript, are you writing a publication of some other type, are you writing an abstract for a meeting, are you making a poster? You can identify the roles and responsibilities. You want to clarify the message and the scientific meaning. So the whole team should be aligned behind what the data that were collected do mean and what the take-home message of your work will be. And then you need to ensure that the authors and contributors understand the process, and this is done through communication. You should present clear timelines. You should listen to people when they raise objections or have questions. Your collaborators are there for a reason, and they always have a good reason for the questions that they have, the objections that they raise. And then we want to build consensus through intellectual exchange and adherence to the guidance. So if someone raises an objection to something because you're working with a new journal, then you might want to look back at the journal guidance and have a more intellectual exchange about that. So here are some process steps that we could follow. So convening the writing team, so bring everyone together in some way, identify roles and responsibilities, review the data and deliverables with the team. So what are we making and what data are we using? We could agree to whatever process that we're using, and then we have a draft, and we can allow authors to review and comment, but remind them of their agreed on roles. Sometimes an author will feel too responsible for fixing all the grammar in a paper when all they need to do is check the data. And so build consensus if there's a misalignment, and then maintain communication. So send polite reminders and make sure that everyone knows what specifically is being asked so that they don't feel too burdened by their requirements of the writing. So moving on then to some common challenges and tips. So the big challenge often in writing material is timeliness and lateness. So if we notify collaborators early, we could use a calendar. If you have access to an electronic calendar, you can like block out an appointment to give them time to review a document. You can send automatic notifications or just kind of routine notifications. This is just a status update for our project so no one feels singled out. And then kind of communication. If you need to have a consensus meeting, maybe block some time on people's calendars or ask for time or schedule that time early, and then you can give the time back if you don't need it. You want to listen to people to understand their questions and objections. You want to invite an explanation of different perspectives, and we want to be flexible. So often, especially if you're writing a manuscript, the journal really is the ultimate rule setter for that activity. So the people within the team need to be a little bit flexible, often with the journal editor as well. This is a second page of challenges and tips. So unclear roles and responsibilities. You can use what's called the RACI diagram, and that lays out who's responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed for each task. So for instance, if a person is taking the lead on writing a section, that's great. Who do they have to consult? And then who do they need to inform about the outcome of what they did? You want to define those roles early include reminders of the role every time you ask for input or feedback. And I think this is important. I worked with a statistician at a vaccines company, and the first time I sent him a set of abstracts, he was trying to correct the grammar in the abstracts, but he was using the wrong style sheet for the meeting that we were going to. And I bumped into him in the cafeteria, and he said he just didn't understand whether he had to comment on that or not. So we were able to come to an agreement because I saw him at lunch. So after that, I tried to be more clear with my authors. So for authorship attribution, you need to know what the standard is, which could vary by the meeting that you're presenting research at, the Congress, or the journal. So you need to refer to that and make sure you know what the standard is. So you need to review those rules and acknowledge with your authors that different standards will exist. So there's the credit taxonomy. I put that in as a backup slide. I also put the reference in, and we'll share those through ACSE so you have access to that. And then you should look at the journal or agency standards. So you can include a link if you're emailing to your team, just link to the journal that you're sending the publication to, or you can explain any specific requirements that are different from what those authors are used to. I'm working with a group right now, and we just submitted a paper to Science. And the requirements for that were very different compared to what a lot of people on that team were used to. So we just tried to explain as we went along, and also as we discovered, because the journal requirements and their practices are changing a lot now as more journals are using artificial intelligence in their journal systems. So just a couple of final challenges. Communicating to lay audiences. Researchers are being called on more and more and more to communicate to lay audiences. So how do you do that? You can use plain language principles. And if you just like look up plain language, there are many, many free websites that explain what this is. You can also find a reader who's not an expert in your scientific area to review the work. So if you are at an academic center, maybe get a graduate student to take a look at it. If you work with people in different fields, maybe somebody from the next lab could take a look at it for you if it's not confidential information. And then artificial intelligence. This is a very big issue in question right now, and different journals have different guidelines for acceptable usage. So some journals will accept work that has an AI component to the writing. Some do not. So you need to be clear about that up front. You want to protect your data. So I wouldn't use an open source AI like ChatGPT if I had confidential or sensitive research data. And then I would always disclose any use of AI. The journal will ask you to do that. And if you're sending material to a meeting or a Congress, they will often ask that as well. And you can use AI in a lot of different places. Like it could be part of the scientific method. Maybe you're studying how AI processes patient data. So I would disclose that. There's other kinds of AI that people can use in data analysis. Or if you're using editing or grammar software, any of that could be disclosed. All right, so I think that this is the end. Yes, so these are the references. And as you can see, I consulted quite a number of references as I was working on this work. So thank you very much for your kind attention. Once again, it's a huge honor to be able to present to a group of researchers doing such important work in so many places. I live and work in New York, and I very rarely get to interact with people from the parts of the world in which you are working. So I do thank you for your work as well as for your kind attention. All right. So do we have questions or?
For such an informative presentation and covering a lot of factors during that. So let's check from attendees, would anyone like to go with online question? Please raise your hand to go with questions. If anyone would like to ask a question directly, please raise your hand.
Okay, so I have a question here from Dr. Mishra about how to identify a research gap in an article. Okay, and then we could, so I'll answer that and then we'll move on to Dr. Singh. So this is an interesting one. One of the things that I teach at Hofstra University, I teach a lot of scientific writing. So I teach the idea of doing a literature review in our School of Health Professions, so to public health students, sometimes in the medical school, also to advanced students in chemistry and biology. So one of the ways to identify a research gap is to just look at the index literature and see if that research is there. And then also to think about what kind of research gap there is. So if you're looking at a specific article, that article might start out with, this is the rationale for this study. So this is the literature that we reviewed. And then at the end of the article, the discussion should have a section of limitations. And that's often the way that you can identify what they think the next step is. So I hope that that did answer the question. So Dr. Singh, would you like to go next? No, Dr. Sharmna? You'd have to take yourself off mute. Okay, I'm not hearing the
My,
question. Oh, sure. Yes,
my question,
sure, Dr. Bekele.
what if nice? It is nice presentation. Now, first of all, I appreciate your presentation regarding on the topics. But what does it mean a link to be included in any emails under a common challenges? I'm not clear by that.
Oh, that's an excellent question. Sorry. Again, I live and work in the United States. So when we send the email to our colleagues, what I do is I go to the journal page on the internet and I put a link so that way they can click on the link directly from my email. And then they don't have to go and look on the internet themselves to find the guidance. If I'm working with colleagues who do not have good access to the internet. Sometimes there's a colleague I work with who does a lot of field research. I will go to the page and I will make a copy of the text that that person needs, and I will paste it right into the email for them so that they don't need to go and look it up. Did that answer the question?
Okay, okay, more clear. This is nice
Yes,
for
sorry.
your presentation. This is correct.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your question.
Okay,
Okay,
thank you very much.
thank you. So, okay, is that Dr. Talper? Okay, so we have some hands raised. So if you have your hand raised, you can ask a question if you like, but you do have to take yourself off mute.
Yes, thank you, dear Lisa. How to best method to suitable best journal?
Oh, how do we pick out the best journal for our work? Oh, that is a very difficult question sometimes. So there's a few different ways that people do that. So often, if you work in a specific research area, you already know which journals your colleagues publish in or journals that you have published in the past. So that's one way that people select journals. Also, you can look through, like I would look in an index sometimes. So something like PubMed or Scopus, they will have different, you can look up research that's similar to your research and see where people are publishing that work. And then, oh, Dr. Singh is saying that the scope of the journals will also help here in the chat. That's an excellent idea. And then the other things that I think about are, do I know any of the journal editors? Where do my colleagues, if I'm working with colleagues, where do they publish their work? Has there been a call from a journal for something on that particular topic? So sometimes the journal is interested in that topic. And then I also try not to send, especially for scientific journals, you don't want to send them work that is too similar to something they just published unless that's the specialty of the journal. So, for instance, I was working with a vaccine company, and one of my colleagues wanted to send an article to the Journal of the American Medical Association, but it was like they just published a paper about a similar vaccine. So they're unlikely to take that because they're very competitive. But like the top vaccine journal was very interested in the paper. So just kind of thinking about what the editors would want. And then the other thing you can do is to send to the journal editor an inquiry about your paper. They will not always answer you, but if they do answer you, then that's a good indication if they want to read the article or if they do not read the article. So I was working with a team recently, so it was someone, and we sent an inquiry to the nature journals, and nature journals was like, well, this isn't particularly right for nature, but they did give us a list of journals that are in their publishing group that they thought would be interested in the article. So then that's very helpful because then you already have a piece of advice from an expert. Okay. So
Many thanks, dear Lisa, for your best presentation. Thanks.
Oh, thank you. And I'm sorry I keep talking when people pause in normal speaking because I do live in New York. So I'm going to take a question out of the chat here and then we can take the next one. But Dr. Aldhadna, which I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. So why would I say, if I sometimes when I send an article to a less good journal, it gets rejected, but then when I send it to a better journal, it's accepted. So that's a really good question that I don't have a great answer to. And I have seen this phenomenon not just in scientific papers, but also in technical communication. I had a paper rejected from like not a very good journal, and they were mean. They sent me a very mean rejection. And then I met the editor from the top journal of technical communication, and they published my paper. So sometimes it's just that your paper, maybe it's too good, maybe it's not a good fit. But somebody's microphone is open. Dr. Bekele, can you mute? And then if everybody could just mute if you're not speaking. Sorry about that. Yeah.
Excellent.
So sometimes the journal needs to maintain balance across the journal. So it's not always about the quality of the article. Sometimes it's about like what else they have space to publish. Or if maybe they ran out of room to publish articles for the year, so they're rejecting articles instead of leaving you waiting to get the publication to come out. Does anyone else have a question that they'd like to speak the question?
Yes, I have.
Yes, thank you. Dr. Al-Hakim, it's okay. Or was that? Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Me?
Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you for your tips. My question is related to your scope now. Is it normal to have 10 rejections from the editor stage?
So it depends on the journal. It also depends on the subject matter that you are trying to publish. So I've been lucky in my career just because of where I worked and who I worked with. We've had very few rejections. But so I worked in the publication field. And again, so when we were watching the video, we had the Dikran and Laura also work in that field. So meeting people from different companies, yes, sometimes people have an article and it's rejected 5 or 10 or 15 times before they can get it published someplace. So, and it can be very unpredictable depending on how interesting the topic is, how many people are publishing on the topic. And right now with AI, sometimes the AI is rejecting things because of a technical problem with your submission that does not have to do with somebody looking at the article and thinking that it's not good. So if you're confident that the article is right for the journal, I sometimes would try again just to make sure that I had all the technical pieces correct and I didn't get an automatic rejection just from the computer.
Okay, but explain why the editors give opportunity for this paper to throw to reviewer stage because as beginner I am beginner for the research. I need the comments of the reviewer to improve my research because I have 10 rejections, but I don't why they rejection it. is it for technical or for the data? I don't know. I am blind now. I am very upset. I think the editor have to give opportunity for the beginner researcher to give them a comments. I don't know if you understand what I mean,
I
but
do.
yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no, this is
Maybe uh, as you
no,
as your editor, yeah.
no, I'm feeling very much this pain. It was when I was publishing in the field of English, it was very difficult at first. Um, so if it's scientific research and you're having trouble getting feedback from a journal, you can use what's called a preprint server. So you can post research to a preprint server and then you can still cite it and then people can comment on it for you. So that's one way to get some feedback on it that's not tied to getting it from the journal. So if you're having bad luck with the journal, then preprint servers are often a way to do that. Hopefully that's
Uh,
Thank you.
helpful.
Okay,
yes,
doctor.
Professor.
Can I?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Hello. Yes, Professor. I do appreciate the presentation. You have presented all the things very clearly. I just want to know from you how ChatGPT or AI is big gun for traditional academic writer. As we know that nowadays many top level journals, Q1 journals, they use the chat GPT to review the papers, and the rejection ratio is rapidly rising. So what do you think that the use of AI while reviewing the article is more important?
Okay. So I think at the journals, so I don't think journals are allowed to use ChatGPT because the data that you send them is confidential and ChatGPT is open source. So they're not allowed to use that. So what they have often at the publisher or the journal is a more simple kind of AI. And it's not checking for the actual content, it's looking for the technical requirements. So did your article meet the technical requirements for the journal? So it's not too long, it has the right sections in it, the tables and the figures are formatted in a way that the system can process. So it's very strange for me right now trying to work with these AI functions. And recently I had a book come out and I've worked with articles at different publishers and it's very unpredictable. So I would try to be patient with that. And in terms of thinking about reviewers and peer review with AI,
Good.
so I think that the problem is more that that peer reviewers might try to use an AI to kind of summarize a document or something like that, and they could miss subtle and important points that are in the article that you have written. So I agree, this is a very big problem, and I don't think that there are very good solutions to this right now. Okay, so I have a question in the, oh, sorry.
Sorry, doctor. I have a question. First of all, I wanted to thank you for the perfect presentation, and I do appreciate your work. So my question here, do we have Scopus journals for humanities? Actually, I searched a lot, and I didn't see or found any articles like Scopus for free. And actually, for the expensive Scopus, it's difficult to pay because we are in Iraq. So $500 or $800, it's very, very expensive. So do you know if we have a free Scopus, especially for humanities?
Yeah, so for humanities, it's very difficult because the humanities are very, very poorly funded. So finding free articles can be very difficult. So there's something called Project Muse. So MUSE. I'll just put it in the chat. And they have a lot of free articles. And then there's something called JSTOR, which also has a lot of free articles. So that's another way to find articles in the humanities. And then also, if you look through Google Scholar, sometimes you can find links to things. Sometimes it's just the abstract, but then it gives you a better idea of like what the article will have in it and what it will contain. And then there are some other online libraries that provide free access to books, but you have to kind of look around for the very specific work. So I think that that's a little bit, it's quite inconvenient, I have to say.
Okay,
I've got,
thank you very much.
oh, you're welcome. And thank you for the kind words.
Okay, thank you, Professor Lisa, for your kind presentation is very helpful to us. My question is that we are facing problem to publish paper in high quality journals due to high APC. As our institution is not unable to pay of the APC, what is your comment or suggestions to get publication in high quality journals like Scopus Index or PubMed, as you have mentioned, for science specifically microbiological field? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a really, really excellent question. So, and it's a huge problem. This problem has gotten much, much worse in recent years. So some journals are offering reduced rates for APC for what they call low and middle income countries and for specific universities. So maybe the university could make a deal with some journals for those article processing charges or the open access fees. Some journals don't have, like, they have an option that you can publish the article for free and then it's only available behind, like, each person has to pay for the article for some period of time, like maybe 6 months or maybe 1 year. That's another option. Sometimes you can ask the journal to waive the fee for financial reasons. So some journals have a mechanism where they have an application form that you can fill out. So that's another possibility. But for these very expensive ones, like so to publish in Science, I think it's 12,000 US dollars. It's very, very much. So if your research is grant funded, what I've been recommending people do is you need to put a line in your grant for those article processing charges because otherwise there's not a way to pay for it. And then there are some groups, I don't do this very frequently, but my understanding is that there may be some groups that offer kinds of I don't know, scholarships, or they offer small grants for those types of purposes as well. The ones that I'm familiar with, I was working with a researcher in Uganda. This was some years ago. It was during the pandemic. But that researcher was getting some funding for article processing charges through something specific that was funded for African countries. So depending on where you live, if you're in a British Commonwealth country, there might be funding sources that come out of the UK for that kind of thing as well.
Okay, I am from Bangladesh actually. So can we get your email address and can we send you email or communicate with you? Is it possible?
So you can communicate to ACSE and they can send me things.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, there's like a lot of people on here, so yeah.
Thank you.
So you're welcome. Okay, let's see. So there was a question in the chat about how to pick out the journal keywords. And I think that's a really good question that I did not cover. So one of the things that I do when I'm looking for keywords is that I go back to the index, or I go to PubMed, or I go to Scopus, and I double check what keywords they have, and I make sure that I pick keywords that match what's already in the published literature. So then that's a problem. Yes. Yeah, no, and Dr. Sahu is saying that if we don't pay the article processing charge, then it's a long time. I agree. I think it's very difficult. And when I'm trying to publish in scientific journals, so for myself, my institution, because I'm in a department of writing studies, my institution will not give me money for article processing charges. So it is actually quite challenging. So I'm limited to places that would invite me to publish or to wait until that embargo is over. So that's been very difficult. And I agree, it's a big problem. And it's a problem that requires attention, like at the level of the ACSE, working, I think, with other councils of science editors to suggest some solutions to these problems. But I really do agree with everyone. Dr. Riddell, did you have a question?
Yes, can you hear me? Can you hear
Yes. Yep.
me? First off, thank you very much. It's been looks like you put a lot of work into this webinar, so thank you. Would you give us some suggestion as to how avoid writer's block? How would you structure your writing? Would you maybe start with an outline or start with your method, or how would you do that? Thank you again. Have a wonderful day.
Yeah, that's a really excellent question. And it's interesting for me because I do write a lot, but I feel like I'm constantly suffering from writer's block. So some strategies that work for me are maybe get some exercise, take a walk, or mix things up a little bit. So like work for a certain amount of time and then take a break. So to make sure that you're doing different kinds of activities. But when I'm doing a scientific paper, what I like to do first is make sure that I have the methods and the results put together first. So if I'm writing up the method, I make sure that I have the result for that as well. Other things that you can do, if you're writing a paper and you already wrote a study protocol for that, like look back at your study protocol. If you're writing a paper and you've presented an abstract or a presentation or a poster at the meeting, start from the work that you've already done because you thought about it at that time and it can really give you a big boost in terms of getting the article done. The other thing for me is, and I don't know how broadly this applies, but I've been getting invited to do things. So sometimes if you get a little bit stuck and someone has invited you to do something, you can send them and you can actually ask them some questions, and then maybe they can help you get over the difficulty that you might be having. So obviously that depends somewhat on the relationships that you have, but I think that that can help. And then also kind of talking to colleagues. At my institution, one of the chemists set up a writing group. This was prior to COVID, but we used to get together like every Friday afternoon and sit in a room for 2 hours. So then everybody would be trying to do their writing at the same time, and it created some support for people. So then those are some of the strategies that I've seen. Okay, let's see. I don't see any more hands, but there's a question in the chat about writing a good literature review section. So that's a really excellent question. The aim of the literature review section of your paper is to show that the research that you did addressed an authentic problem, and also that the research that you chose is the only logical next step for the problem that you set out. So your literature review should show that you understand the research area, but also the literature review should lead to the particular gap that you're filling. So you want to organize that in an order that leads logically into your solution. Let's see. I've got a question. Let's see. Research works for article. After how many years is it expired for publications? I'm not 100% sure I understand this question, but it really depends on the field. So again, I was working with a team that wants to publish, they wanted to publish in one of the nature journals, and they were citing research from the 1970s because that was the most current research in the field. So you need to know the field, or you need to know when the method was developed. It's not necessarily just tied to a certain number of years. Although some journals don't want you citing things that are more than 5 or 10 years old. That will be in the journal guidance. Let's see. Let's see. Oh, how can researchers avoid predatory or low quality journals? That is a really excellent question. So there used to be someone, Beale, he was keeping a list of potentially predatory journals. He was a librarian. He worked at a US, I think, university or college. And then suddenly his list became the list, and he stopped doing the list because he was getting too much attention for that. But you can look on the internet gives kind of a lot of guidance for how to avoid predatory or low quality journals. When I get an invitation from a journal to do peer review, I always check to make sure that the journal is reputable. So I will just like put the name in and ask if it's predatory and then see what comes up on the internet. So that's often a good way to do it. And then there's journals that they started out not being predatory, but they got bought by places and now they're predatory. So I think that that's kind of it's like a big question. So I think keeping in touch with what I called your discourse community. So understand who else in your field publishes in that field, understand what your research mentor publishes and where they publish, and understanding the journals that are recognized by your institution can be very, very helpful. So if you don't know anything about the journal, you can look it up. And if you can't find any decent information or any strong information, then I would avoid the journal. It might not be predatory, but it might be. And if you're at a stage of your career where you need that publication to keep your job or get your next promotion, then it's higher stakes. But I will say that there's a journal, it's called let's see, it's the Rambam Maimonides Journal. And they had reached out to me. I didn't know who they were, but I looked at the journal and there was a researcher who I know is very reputable, who publishes there. So I was able to reach out to that researcher and they confirmed that it was a good journal. And actually it's a lovely journal. It's really quite nice and they're very pleasant and easy to work with. So I've got a question here that has come up again about the publish or perish culture. Does that weaken the quality of manuscripts? I think it just makes the researchers very upset and tense. And when you're feeling upset and tense, it is very difficult to write a good quality manuscript. And it creates a lot of pressure to send things out maybe before they're finished or maybe before you feel comfortable, or to maybe try to cut corners on the submission process. And I'm going to say that with the AI, particularly with the AI in the submission portals for all of these journals, it's taking longer to get the publications together from a technical standpoint. So I would say that you may feel that you're under pressure, but taking an extra hour or two on the front end can save you many months of effort. So I would stick with it and be very well prepared. Let's see. How many articles do we have to cite to support a research gap in an article? That is an excellent question. And it does depend on the field in which you are publishing, and it also depends on the journal where you are publishing. So what I do is I go back and I look at the journal to see how many articles they tend to cite. So some journals will have a limit on the number of articles that you can cite. So that is a key. But I mean, often in the introduction section of an article, like somewhere between 5 and 15 references should be enough, but it depends on the research field. Like during COVID, that was very difficult and people were citing a lot more because the research was very uncertain. So it will depend on your research area. Let's see. Is expository explanation accepted? That's a really good question. I think that this depends on the journal, and I think it also depends on the kind of article that you're writing. So many journals have an article type, like you could write a letter, or you could write a suggestion for methods paper, or sometimes they have brief communication formats where you can put something in that's briefer or it's at an earlier stage. And that's a way to get some feedback if you're in that particular situation. But that is a really very good question. Let's see. Oh, here's a great question about visuals, some practical tools or approaches. Yeah, to help people provide high quality figures. So that is a great question. Usually for journals, they will accept the standard of the type of figures that you could make in something like Microsoft Excel or Microsoft Word or PowerPoint or Google Slides or other free software. It just needs to be clear and crisp. So like high quality to me means that like the label is complete, that it's clear what the data are, and that you're not using strange abbreviations that might not be clear to the reviewer. So it doesn't have to be extremely fancy. It just needs to be clear. Let's see. And let's see. What are the most common mistakes researchers make in scientific writing? And how, I think the most common mistake is to not put enough time into doing the writing and not planning ahead. So like you need to plan ahead for all the pieces. So I've had many colleagues who had a very bad surprise when they wrote up an article and then they went to submit it and they found out that the article was not in the right format for the journal where they wanted to submit that article. So, for instance, I was working with a team and we were going to a journal and the journal changed the word count that was allowed. So they reduced the word count from like 4,000 words to 3,000 words. So we had to go back and redo the article. So making sure that you plan ahead and knowing what the journal wants are the most important things to save you time. Dr. Tefera? I see your hand raised. Do you have a question?
Can I ask you?
Sure.
Yes, Lisa.
Yeah.
I have some question.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you very much for review article.
Yes. Oh, your sound is breaking up. Maybe you should put the question to the chat and we'll see if I can.
Okay, thank you. If it is not clear, I will write it. But for your information, if I wanted to write an article review for a given topic, how many articles just I'm going to read? The first question is that, but what's the difference between meta-analysis and review article? I'm somewhat confused with the review article and the meta-analysis. If you are come up with a correct answer, just appreciate your response.
Okay, so I will answer that question because that's a really great question. So so just a review article. So those are usually invited by the journal. So the journal editor would reach out to you and say, "Hey, expert person, I need a review article about this topic." So recently, some colleagues that I know through the Rhetoric of Health and Medicine wrote to me and they said, "Lisa, we need an article for our book. So please write us an article." So in that case, like I know them, so it's pretty clear. If you're writing a meta-analysis, so a meta-analysis has to follow a particular guidance. So you could do something like a Prisma. I'm going to put that into the chat. But you can look at the Equator Network. And they give the rules for kind of different types of meta-analysis. So that's a study. So you're doing a structured, systematic review of literature out of a specific database, and then you're following particular process steps in order to have a data set at the end. So you're reporting on the data and then you're summarizing the articles that way. So those don't have to be invited. That's like a research project, and that those can be submitted to many different kinds of journals. If you look at the journal pages, they will say the types of articles that they will accept. So I think that that's something also to consider. And they will also say if they require that you follow the Prisma guidance, they will say that, and then you will know how to follow those directions. And again, the Prisma guidance that's on the internet, it has a checklist that you can follow, and you can just kind of follow their process. Let's see. What else do we have? Let's see, balance pressure for visibility and rankings with the need to present. Okay, so this is an ACSE question. So how do we balance the pressure for visibility with the need to protect research integrity and authentic scientific writing? So I think institutions need to provide a space, but institutions need to do fundraising in order to make sure that their researchers have money for article processing charges, that they have money that they can have a stipend for a graduate student to help you write your article up, that there is a training opportunity for the early stage researchers and for the students to learn these skills. So on an institutional level, it's kind of thinking about how do we create resources for the next generation and to support our current generation. And then if someone is a lab head and doing grant-based research, like, does the institution support their grant process? Or do they make it easy for people to get grants? Do they make it easy to fund the grants? So those are some things that institutions can really look at. I know at the institution where I am, we've had a lot of, like, there's been many different people moving in and out of our grant office, and it has created a problem for people who do grant-based research. And this is above some of the chaos that we're having in the United States around grants from certain places in the government. So if the institution is well organized and they think about supporting financially and also structurally within the institution, their researchers, that's the best thing that the institution can do. Oh, how many years recommended for agricultural field experiments? So this is very far outside my area of expertise. What I would do is I would look up the kind of experiment that you're doing and see what people have been publishing. So you want to match it up to the existing literature. Let's see. I see any more. Oh, ACSE, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you so much, Liza. I think the toll is coming up. So I want to ask one pre-question that's submitted from one of our members related specifically to the topic. How do you see that? How can the scientists working in non-English speaking institutes, what are the possibilities and how they can improve the clarity and global reach of their manuscripts?
Right. So if you look at the most globally influential journals, the authors in those journals are commonly from places where English is not the first language spoken. So I don't think that that itself is a barrier. I think the barriers are more in terms of having access to the resources to do research that's of the caliber that could be in those journals. However, if you're doing high quality research and you're working in a kind of regional environment where, say everyone is working in a language outside English, and many of your publications are appearing in languages outside English. So this could actually be somewhat common in Japan, in China, in other places in Southeast Asia, where there's a very strong publishing mechanism within those languages, or actually even in French. I think that that's another common language where there's many journals that publish in French. So kind of think about journals that also have an English abstract, like maybe as a first step, but then like looking at the idea that the language that you put into a research article, you can very strongly model that on a published example. So it's not that you have to sit down and write it in English. You can read articles in English and start to see how in that journal they represent certain things. And then you can try to adopt that voice. The other thing that you can do is try to just make sure your sentences are short and simple. And the basic way that scientific writing is done in English is that you make sure that all of your technical terms are correct. So that's pretty easy because the technical terms are often common to all languages. And then don't use a lot of fancy other words. So just, it's like, we performed these technical process steps in order to do this, and just keep the language simple. And then it makes it much easier to write. And again, you can help train your junior researchers and also your students. If they have a little bit of a script, it just makes it a lot easier. So it's not about developing an interesting voice. You don't need to do that. You just need to put things into a predictable place. And there actually is an article. It's called The Science. I'll just put it in here in the chat. The Science of Scientific Writing. It was published in 1991. This is an excellent article, and it just kind of shows all the things that you can do to make scientific writing easier. And it's just a very nice guide. My students don't like it because I make them read it, but then after I make them read it and then they use it, they find it to be very helpful. So
Thank you so much, Lisa, for sharing all of the insights and answering all of the queries and questions for today's webinar. Before we move to wrap-up session, we would like to take screenshots for today's attendance. If anyone wants to be comfortable, please put your cameras on so that we can take a few pictures and then go to the wrap-up session. It's not mandatory. If you are comfortable, just put your screens on so that we can have a few screenshots for participation for today's webinar and then move forward to our last wrap-up session. All right, on count of 2, smile. We have like 3 to 4 screens, so just stay tuned with us. All right. There you go. Now, for the wrap-up part, I would like to extend a heartfelt thanks to Lisa for extending so much time for today's webinar and for sharing such valuable insights, and special thanks to all of you for your active participation, all of the attendees, regardless of the time zone that you are joining us today. But like every event or webinar of ACSE, today marks the day that the discussion was very, very engaging. And today's discussion, it somewhat highlighted that the part of scientific writing is not just about producing a manuscript out of what you do. It's about maybe communicating the responsibility the researchers have while they do research and navigating their institutional expectations and maybe working ethically with collaborations with peers and then communicating their research in form of manuscript to readers. So on behalf of Asian Council of Science Editors, I would like to express our gratitude to Dr. Lisa DeTora and to each one of you joining us today. Stay tuned for further ACSE events and activities, and feel free to join the council and recommend it to your connections. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.